Bet with your friends on WynnBET Sportsbook today using promo code BlueWire to get up to $1,000 toward a risk-free sports bet. Sign up now at WYNNBet.com. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at WynnBET.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WynnBET is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.
What is crack-a-lacking, Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Valley, coming at you once more without my fantabulous co-host, Adam Cromwell. Our team look-ahead train rolls on. We are up to the Phoenix Suns. So naturally, I brought on Mike Vigil and Sam Cooper from the Timeline podcast. Those guys do a great job with their podcast, their YouTube channel. They have a Patreon now. You should subscribe to it, so you can get a bonus podcast episode per week. They have a very interesting over-under episode where they make up some fake lines about the team and go back and forth with their guests, choosing over-under. I was actually a little bit surprised that the picks that came out on Deandre Ayton's over-under for three-point attempts. Digressing there, though, follow them on Twitter. Mike can be found at @ProtectedPick, spelled exactly as it sounds. Sam is at @SCooperHoops, or as he calls it, Scooper Hoops, sometimes, spelled exactly as it sounds. Had a great conversation with them as always. They were also nice enough to, as someone who prides themselves on being available and punctual, I was 15 minutes late because I lost track of time, because I was exhausted. They waited around for me. Super appreciative of that. So I just want to give them a shout out for being so flexible and generous with their time. Before we get started, the usual housekeeping notes here. Please, pretty please continue rating, reviewing, and subscribing to Hardwood Knocks wherever you get your podcasts. Whether you use iTunes or not, as long as you have access to it, we ask that you head over to iTunes, search Hardwood Knocks, throw us a 5-star rating, write a review. Subscriptions, ratings, reviews, those really help us move up the charts. Make sure you're downloading every episode. Maybe help us promote the podcast, refer friends, send them to family members, random people that you know online, or random people that you don't know, but who you think might appreciate it, or just to random people in general. And if this is your first time listening to the Hardwood Knocks podcast, maybe it's because you really like the Phoenix Suns. Maybe you're just diehard fans of the Timeline podcast, fellas, or perhaps you're here by accident at random. Consider throwing us that permanent subscription. We cover the league at large. We are pleasantly sub-mediocre, only mildly insufferable. I call that a win. Moving on, though, let's talk lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of Phoenix Suns with the fellas from the Timeline podcast, Mike Vigil and Sam Cooper. Mike, Sam, thank you so much for coming back on the Hardwood Knocks podcast to talk some Phoenix Suns with me. First and foremost, however, how the hell are you two doing after that? After a good offseason, you guys had a pretty wild actual basketball season last year. Mm-hmm. A lot of stuff going on. So how did the actual offseason treat you?
I mentioned this to Sam yesterday. I feel like I'm still in like different stages of grief depending on the day after the finals loss. Today I feel good. I feel all right today.
I felt grief for a while. It's a natural reaction, but I got over it. Mike and I did this we called it an internal development series on our podcast. This was a couple weeks ago now, but we kind of talked really through the development of all the young players on this core: Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, Deandre Ayton, Cam Johnson, campaign, yada, yada. And I was kind of grieving going into that series, but coming out of it, and I know Mike feels the same way, we really sort of talked ourselves into this team again. And I'm like fully past grief. I'm into acceptance. And I'm once again really excited for the season to start. Honestly, I wish preseason we could kind of just skip it and go straight to game one, but it's going to be a couple of long weeks.
Yeah.
One, I can't stand preseason, so I'm totally with you. Two, the internal development series was really good. I did not listen to the campaign episode yet, and I'm in the middle of the Ayton one, but people should check that out from the Timeline podcast. Very easy to find. Did it make it harder or easier to accept the fact of what happened in the finals, knowing that the Suns were like kind of one of the biggest surprise finals teams in recent memory? Were those, you guys were high on the team. I remember talking to you last year entering the year, but no one was, hey, they're going to the NBA's finals high on the Suns at that point.
I think for me, there's like they're ahead of schedule. Like ultimately they're ahead of schedule, but like at the same time, Chris Paul, like there's this sort of dueling timelines for this team right now, where there's the young guys and the attempt to develop them as quickly as possible in order to be as good as possible. And then there's sort of the race against father time for Chris Paul, right? Those guys need to be as good as possible before Chris Paul starts declining at all, which, in my opinion, he didn't really decline last season. There was an injury, I think, in the playoffs that affected his play late, but even in the playoffs, he averaged over 20 points and an insane number of assists, a great season for Chris Paul. So in one sense, it's great. In another sense, it's kind of hard to pin down exactly what's going to happen like this season, but even beyond this season, because I think it makes sense for the team right now to go all in on this season and do everything possible to win this year with Chris Paul being where he is. But then, like, at some point, I can't help but think about what happens when he does start declining and his skill set starts declining, and how much of the skills that the other guys bring actually make up for that. So in a sense, it does make me feel better because there's still a bunch of young guys on this team. In another sense, one of the best players on the team is still really old. So I have this dueling mindset about it, I guess.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of variability to it. I feel good though, even knowing that kind of Chris Paul pin drop could come at any time. But we'll see. We can't control it. Just got to embrace the chaos.
I'll throw this one to you, Sam, to start. Are there any impressions that you have from their offseason that you're thinking about heading into the regular season where we talk, and we're going to get into their actual guys where the continuity will help this team a ton. You still have very important players on this team that are going to get better. And so that's sort of how you get the leg up. But would you have liked to have seen a little bit more of an aggressive offseason from them when you're looking at making additions to the roster? Or do you fall in the camp of, well, who else were they getting and what were they supposed to do?
Yeah, the reason I was kind of laughing at the beginning there is because I've heard your thoughts, Dan, on our offseason. And so I basically echo those 100% what you had previously said on the podcast. I think the Suns had a good offseason. I think they addressed obvious areas of need. I applaud them for the Chris Paul and campaign extensions, primarily because I think those are just both great values. JaVale McGee, obvious area of need with defense and rebounding. Landry Shamet, you can never have enough shooters. But I kind of feel like they didn't go far enough, especially when you consider the resources that were on the table, not using the full mid-level exception, not using the biannual exception when you could have, just basic things, but not even really trying to make an attempt at replacing a guy like Torrey Craig. A lot of Suns fans will tell me, well, it's Torrey Craig. He played 15 minutes per game. He's a 9th or 10th man. It's not really that big of a deal. They may very well be right. And I do certainly believe that the Suns are a very, very, very good team. I believe they're a top 2 team in the Western Conference going into this season in terms of talent. But there is that nagging feeling that they really could have done more. You look at the rest of the Western Conference, and what the Lakers are doing is really a risk. It's a huge risk. And every other team didn't even try. I mean, you look at the Jeff Green signing for Denver, Rudy Gay for Utah, and it's like Larry Nance is one that I actually like for Portland. But it's like these are all kind of minor moves on the margins if we really think about it. And so there is that temptation to say, Phoenix, you were just in the finals. Why didn't you try and push a little bit harder? And it's definitely something I think about a lot. I'm still satisfied with the offseason, but they definitely could have done more. That's my opinion.
What are your thoughts fall on that, Mike?
Well, I think I have sort of mixed feelings about this as well, because part of me feels like one of the biggest issues for the Phoenix Suns was that they didn't have a clear-cut third best player. And like, if they were overly aggressive, basically if they didn't buy into any sort of hype in the trip to the finals and made a massive move, like put other guys on the trade market outside of Devin Booker and Chris Paul to try and find that third best player, whether that be Mikal Bridges or Deandre Ayton, I wouldn't have been overly angry about that. I guess in a sense, I do buy into the finals. I do buy into that run. I think they're an excellent team, and I think they'll be an excellent team going into next year, regardless of any changes that they make. But at the same time, if they had done something major to try and bring some sort of third star to the team, I would not have been mad about it. So in general, during the offseason, I tend to have like these overly aggressive thoughts about getting star players. So that's usually where I stand. And
it's how you get yourself in trouble too.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we cover one team, right? So when we cover one team, if I start talking about trading players that just made it to the NBA finals, people do tend to get a little angry about that. So I have to find ways to talk about it without upsetting people. But like,
aggregators, get ready. There's the warning.
I think a lot of what the Suns are relying on right now is no Kawhi Leonard, no Jamal Murray, the Lakers being old. And that's like all of those things together, I think, are what sort of combined to make the Suns one of the favorites in the Western Conference in this coming season, which is fine and fair. But like there is a scenario where Kawhi Leonard is fully healthy, where Jamal Murray is fully healthy, where the Lakers don't get injured in the playoffs, where in those scenarios, I would have probably wished that the Suns had made a bigger move to bring in some sort of star. Now, of course, trades are all speculative and who knows who's available or whatever it all is. But I am overall happy with the offseason, and I think they're going to be an excellent team going forward. I just would not have been mad had they done something more aggressive that may have pissed off a lot of Suns fans, to be honest.
Yeah, I think, and even just something as simple as spending your entire MLE would have been like a show of good faith. But I'm in agreement basically with both of what you guys said. I think also what made me feel better about the offseason to this point is if you had agreed to extensions with Deandre Ayton and Mikal Bridges. And I'm just curious as to, the wired take on this. And it shouldn't be with Mikal Bridges because I know people, for some reason, Deandre Ayton is viewed as the max contract lock and not Mikal Bridges. If both these guys get the restricted free agency, or if either of them gets there, barring anything like a catastrophe this year, they're getting max offer sheets. I'm just like, why is this turning out to be such a complicated thing? And the wired take would be you don't want to extend either of them in case you want to make that bigger swing on the trade market this season because they become so hard to deal in that scenario.
Yeah. I don't know that I've heard anyone say that Mikal Bridges is definitely going to get a max offer sheet in the in restricted free agency. So first of all, I appreciate that you say that, Dan. And I think it's definitely possible depending on what he does. And the Suns have really been talking up Mikal Bridges as a third option on offense this season. So if he starts to up his overall possessions, that he's actually taking shots and creating for himself and for others, I could definitely see that happening. But yeah, I think that's definitely something that they're taking into consideration. Dan, I do wonder if, like, are they better trade assets without being extended? Is that how you're looking at it? Because I do wonder if even just extending them now, whether that be during this season or in the off season next year, if that extension could actually help the Suns as far as if they consider trading those guys going forward. Because in my opinion, you just got to lock those guys up right now and worry about the rest later, because I still think they're going to be tradable on extensions.
Yeah, I mean, long term, I would rather, Mikal Bridges or Deandre Ayton is going to be more valuable with extra years on their deal. But this season specifically, if you sign your extension by the deadline, like the average annual salary and the poison pill comes into play, and you're essentially saying, if we make a move, it's not going to involve one of these two. And I don't know if the front office would be thinking along those lines, but you don't know how the outside star trade market might develop this year. And if you really are, you guys mentioned, both of you mentioned at the top, if you really are thinking about the urgency of this team because of the age of Chris Paul, I don't know if that goes into the calculus at all. I just found it curious that, we're this late into the offseason and like neither one of them has signed an extension. Like we haven't even started dealing with public facing concrete numbers for either of them. And most people just assume that Deandre Ayton is going to get the max. So there's that. And I would be firmly of the belief that if Bridges does hit RFA, I know there's not a ton of teams with cap space, but if he does anything more on the ball, or even if he's just the same player that he is this year, that is the archetype that teams want. Well, someone is giving him a max.
Mikal is, I'd have to look it up. Mikal is like 25 years old already. If he does exactly the same, then the figure that I've heard people throw out is like 4/100, maybe 4/90, stuff like that. But if he makes the leap I'm expecting him to on the ball, absolutely, I agree with you, Dan. He's a max contract guy. If he could get up to like 17, 18 points per game, which I think is totally feasible, we can talk about it more later. Then he can hit that figure, no problem. And so both guys go into the extension. Both guys go into these negotiations, frankly, with a lot of leverage, way more leverage than the average third or fourth year player.
Yeah, and I wonder how much agents sort of look at the landscape of free agency in general, where all these stars are just signing extensions now, and not a lot of them are going to be available for free agency. And DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges could be two of the best free agents available if they were to hit restricted free agency. And the Suns still, as far as leverage goes, the Suns still own their restricted free agency rights, so they could match anything that they're offered at that point. But it could be a lot. You're definitely right about that, Dan.
I'm more of a fan, especially if you're not trying to prioritize cap flexibility, like build up the goodwill with the players, because all you're going to have to do is just match the offer that you're not giving them now, essentially, to me. Let's talk about that Mikal Bridges leap, though, Sam. What is it? You already mentioned sort of the off the dribble jumper and the numbers. Like, he sort of increased his volume there over the past few years. What does that actual leap in full look like for Mikal Bridges? Is it just sort of honing that down? And do you think he's going to get the opportunity to do that on this team?
I absolutely think he's going to get the opportunity to do that on this team. If you were paying attention to training camp, both Monty Williams, when asked about it, said he used the term third option, talking about Mikal Bridges. He said, "We believe that this guy could be our third option." I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact quote anymore. But he said he wanted to find more opportunities for him to play that role within the scope of the Suns offense, simply because he understands, like, some Suns fans look at that, they maybe take offense if they're big Deandre Ayton stands, but we understand it's talking about perimeter initiation of sets, and Mikal Bridges much more comfortable with the ball in his hands than any other potential third option on the Suns team. I guess Cam Payne dribbles the ball, but he doesn't really fit the bill for what we're talking about of being a starting level talent. And then Chris Paul, also coming out of training camp, was asked, who's the guy who you think has added the most to his game over the summer? And he immediately answered Mikal Bridges. So for us, it's like, we looked at the stats. Mikal is incredibly efficient on the ball in limited volume, and he's incredibly efficient off the ball. The only thing that he has ever had to do is add the volume, and obviously maybe the efficiency will go down, but he just needs to add the reps. I'm very confident they're going to add the reps this year. I know it's just preseason, but in their preseason game against the Lakers the other day, Devin Booker was out, and who took the most shots? It was Mikal Bridges. Took like 18 shots in like 25 minutes, something I've never seen him do before. They were running him in their usual elbow sets, trying to get him to come around screen set at the elbow in the way that they typically do for Devin Booker to get his mid-range shot off. They were starting to do that for Mikal Bridges. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not like he's going to dominate the offense all of a sudden. I don't think he's going to be a 20-plus point per game guy with the amount of touches going to Chris Paul or Booker. But I think we're going to see a leap. I really do.
Yeah, as far as third options go, whoever can catch the ball 20 feet away from the basket and dribble either towards the basket or in a way that creates a shot for other people, whether that be DeAndre Ayton or Mikal Bridges, that's going to be the third option for the Suns at this point, because they just need one other guy who can do that. So it's just whoever wants to do that. I think that we have seen more of Mikal Bridges doing that than DeAndre Ayton, so there's reason to believe that it could be Mikal Bridges as far as that goes, because it's just, if DeAndre Ayton needs the ball close to the basket in order to score, that's a good skill to have, and he's probably one of the best in the league at that. But it's just harder to get the ball there. You need someone like Mikal Bridges, or of course Chris Paul or Devin Booker, to get it to him. So it's just up to them. As far as Mikal Bridges goes, I don't know that people listening to this podcast are aware of how efficient he was. He was one of the most efficient wings in the NBA last season. Only 13.5 points per game. So how scalable that is going to be important, but like, he's able to make mid-range shots. He's one of the most effective players in transition. He shoots over 40% from three, and it's hard to block his shot because he's tall really and his arms are extremely long. So you put all of that together, it's an extremely good package for a wing player to have. I think for him now, and even Ayton, I think it's about confidence and a willingness to embrace contact, because Mikal doesn't really go at the rim when he's being guarded. He's not embracing contact the way Devin Booker does. Really, on the Suns, there's two guys that do it. It's Devin Booker and it's Abdel Nader. So if it can be Mikal Bridges or DeAndre Ayton, whichever one of those guys, that would be huge for the Suns. And I think for him, if he can get to the line more by embracing that contact at the rim and understanding that he has that first step, especially from the corner, that would help him out a lot and help the Suns out a lot.
So this past year, he took a little over 90 off the dribble jumpers, if my numbers are correct. If I set the over-under at 125, Mike, are you taking the over the under on that for him this season?
I would definitely take the over. Just, I know that guessing based on preseason games is dangerous, but it just looks like something that he's become more comfortable doing. And even if we sort of plotted those out over the course of last season, I have a feeling those started peaking towards the end of the season as well. It's just something that he's been working on a lot. Now, don't expect a bunch of pull-up three-pointers, even though
he shoots really well on them.
9 of 14 on them last year, I think.
He shoots really well on them. He does like, one every week, but he actually historically has shot really well on them. I'm not kidding.
But for him, what it often comes down to is because he's the third option, the ball swings to him in the corner. A closeout is slightly late or a little off balance, and he attacks the closeout. He gets 2 steps under the 3-point line, and he's in from mid-range. The closeout is late, and he shoots a mid-range jumper. I think he's going to do that more and more and more. And so I expect that to be over.
Did I not set the over-under high enough? Sam, would you smash the over on this as well?
I'm smashing the over. If you set the over-under at 180, so he literally doubles it, I might still take the over. That might be a little more risky, but we'll see.
My first inclination was to go 150, and I thought this was going to be an instance last season where I was like higher on the Suns than you guys. I was like, I need to lower this number a little bit just to make it more realistic. But I would take over 150 for him easily, and I like the idea of him as the third option, whatever you want to call it, because there's a more nuanced decision maker on the ball to me than there is with a Deandre Ayton. I also think that Mikal Bridges' archetype is just better suited right now to being a third option.
Yeah.
I think he can be, if he's going to, attack closeouts or open lanes, I think he's someone that has at least shown, maybe not a ton last season, but at least like over his career that he can drop some nifty passes in those situations. I did have someone in my mentions the other day because I was watching, I don't even remember who they were playing, but Cam Johnson hit like a behind the back dribble, step back jumper.
Lakers, yeah.
Someone was in my mentions and just said like, that's why he's going to be the third option over Mikal Bridges.
There are Suns fans who believe that. Is that
this new standard for like? Was Cam Johnson hitting a bunch of these shots last year? And
no, not a lot.
No, but this is the crazy thing about Cam Johnson. So Cam is much flashier in his best highlight reel. The best highlight reel, if you compiled all of Cam's 2 seasons now with the Suns into just like the best 2 or 3 minutes and found the most juicy, tantalizing clips, he looks like a much better player than Mikal Bridges. He does, because he has these flashes of brilliance. But then you look at his stat line and you see, okay, statistically 9 points, 3 rebounds, a steal or a block, slightly above league average efficiency. He's not doing it on a nightly basis. But he'll have step back threes, which Mikal doesn't give us. He'll have flashy poster dunks, which Mikal doesn't give us. And I think just holding on to those moments alone gives some Suns fans a semblance of hope that Cam Johnson really has that higher potential. Personally, I don't see it. I think Cam's a really good player, and I think he will continue to improve for the Suns as well. I don't see the same ceiling in him as I do with Mikal.
Yeah, I think there's been a few of these really remarkable looking sort of behind the back step backs by Cameron Johnson that make his handles look better than they are. And I think, and maybe they are, because look, I think Cam Johnson's ran like 5 pick and rolls for the Suns ever. So it's difficult to really evaluate what he can be as far as creation on the ball. Right now, we're just asking him to finish, whether that be catching and shooting or catching and just going to the rim and dunking on guys, which is the biggest surprise about Cameron Johnson. But we've seen a lot more of it from Mikal Bridges, and just like Sam said, not as flashy. But I also think there's an element of Cam Johnson played better in the playoffs than he played in the regular season, and Mikal Bridges on offense arguably played worse in the playoffs than he did in the regular season. So I think there's sort of a lasting memory for some Suns fans with that stuck in their mind, and I don't know that that's fair to Mikal Bridges or even Cameron Johnson to expect them to be better. I do think that I wonder how many of those people realize how much more efficient Mikal Bridges was than Cameron Johnson last season, because it's just he does it so almost invisibly that maybe people don't really connect with that as much.
Mikal Bridges was a more efficient mid-range shooter last season than either Chris Paul or Devin Booker. And obviously he's doing it on like a fifth of the volume. He only maybe took 50 of those shots all season. But yeah, I think a lot of Suns fans even don't realize that.
He was also better from 3-point than Cameron Johnson, who was drafted as quote unquote the best shooter of the draft.
You look at every facet of scoring for Mikal, and he just needs the volume. He's in the like 90th plus percentile in everything, every spot on the floor.
Yeah, you guys read a bunch of the numbers off in the internal development episode, and it was like an acid trip, just like hearing something like reiterated. So I'm all for Mikal Bridges getting the bigger role.
Can I ask you, Dan? Sorry, before we move on.
No, go ahead.
We just did an over/under episode on our podcast. We do it every year where I just make up fake over/under numbers, and then we make bets on them basically for the end of the season. And I set the over/under for Mikal Bridges' points per game at 15.8. I had 13.5. Would you just hit that over right away? We all did over, for the record.
Yeah, I would have went over as well. I mean, just be. I feel like as of right now, in large part because of maybe you guys over the past year, I have a lot of people on Suns Twitter that seem to like me. because I was very high on this team. So if I'm ever lower on them than the consensus, God help me. But like Mikal Bridges is just, I'm addicted to Mikal Bridges. I think he is still, I thought he should have been. Like this is someone who I think is already an all defensive player and just hasn't been recognized for it yet. And the fact that there's still more to plumb on offense, like that endlessly tantalizes me. And so the fact that even I think it was Mike said on this, like you haven't been hearing that people just think he's going to get a max deal if he hits RFA. That boggles my mind when you like, are people just basing this off of what, OG Anunoby got? Because like,
yes.
So that's just a terrible comparison because OG Anunoby is just wildly underpaid right now.
Right.
So,
that's a good point.
Shopify is the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources that were once reserved for big business. So upstarts, startups, and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. Scaling your business is a journey of endless possibility. Believe me, my fishing company that I started 5 years ago with my best friend Aaron called Woo Tungsten. Actually, it's pronounced Woo Tungsten because that's the sound you make when you catch a giant fish. Woo! We started this company 5 years ago, November of 2016, and we've been on Shopify since day one. We sell tungsten fishing weights, and our business would be nowhere close to where it is today if it wasn't for Shopify making things so incredibly easy. And like mine, Shopify powers over 1.7 million businesses from first sale to full scale. You can reach customers online and across social networks with an ever-growing suite of channel integrations and apps, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and more. You can gain insights as you grow, and they have detailed reporting of conversion rates, profit margins, and beyond. More than a store, Shopify grows with you. This is possibility powered by Shopify. Go to shopify.com/Blue Wire. That's all lowercase for a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/Blue Wire right now. That's shopify.com/BLUEWIRE. Shopify.com/Blue Wire.
Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part? There's no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package.
Maybe I'm too high on Mikal Bridges, but I'm not this seems like someone, especially if they're going to give him a little bit more influence over the offense. And even if they don't, and one of my questions on here is do we expect to see Chris Paul has missed, I think, 4 regular season games over the past 2 years. If there's more of a maintenance program in place for him, that's going to be more opportunity for Bridges. And I feel like the Suns offense is also built to, I don't want to use the word cater to, but feature a Mikal Bridges over a Deandre Ayton if we're going to start expanding roles. And then even just because I mentioned before, I just trust Mikal Bridges as a more variance in his decision-making with the ball. I would be shocked if this is something we're going to look at and see Cam Johnson's on-ball volume just go through the roof too.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that. I just think that's the biggest challenge for Monty Williams this entire season. It's just balancing the development and the possessions and who they go to. And look, you mentioned the prospect of Chris Paul maintenance, and he just doesn't seem to do that. So
Right.
that makes it even harder. And I think and we talked about it on our most recent episode too. That's posted Monday. But people will hear us talk about it as well. I think it's going to be a challenge for Monty Williams to even convince Chris Paul to want to do that. But Chris Paul, it's all about a mindset. He just talked about it recently, where he thinks you treat every single game the same, and if you don't treat every single game the same, then it's hard to take that mindset into the playoffs with you. So, that's why Chris Paul teams tend to win more regular season games. He treats those like playoff games in his mind, and then he takes that into the playoffs, and it's hard to convince him to do something that he just doesn't seem to want to do. Not to mention how proud he is of how well he takes care of his body, the fact that he's fully plant-based right now, and I think he's just really proud of being a guy who continually plays games late into his career.
Does maybe like the partial guarantee on the third year of his deal and then the non-guarantee in the fourth year maybe make him, think longer term a little bit more?
I hope so. I really don't know. It's really tough to get into his mind, but I hope so.
Those are really uncharted waters if we're talking about that. Like the viability of him at age 39, 40, still trying to get another contract.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, after people thinking that Chris Paul was headed for this huge drop off, and then he credits his diet, and Mike mentioned it, like he's fully plant based now. Like he said, he went that route, and his body, like the inflammation went down. It was easier for him to recover. I've reached the point of, I probably expect him to break down a little bit later in the season, but I've reached the point of I will believe he's done when I actually see it, like the LeBron thing, that refrain that I'll just deliver.
Yeah, have I Googled plant-based diets a few times every time he has a good game? Yeah, I do it every time. I'm still not there yet, but he's definitely making a convincing argument.
Yeah, I mean, if I could do anything as well at that age as he's doing it, maybe I would consider that too. To sort of wrap up on Cam Johnson really quickly, even though I'm jumping around this outline, Sam, where's like the biggest opportunity for a Cam Johnson improvement? Is it just him maybe playing more minutes? It's this weird situation because he's 25, turns 26 in March. Like this is someone who's older than Devin Booker, and yet it still seems like he's been just surprisingly good in each of his seasons, in part because it's like, well, people didn't expect him to be good. They thought that pick was a reach. So I'm curious what a better version of Cam Johnson looks like for this team.
So going back to what I was talking about, where the Suns didn't really try to replace Torrey Craig, gets me thinking about maybe that's the answer there to what they're thinking of doing with Cam Johnson. I know it's corny to bring up a Muscle Watch update, but at least Cam told us, or he told reporters who were actually there in training camp, that he's up to 220 now. I think he came into the league closer to around 205, maybe 210. And, if you think about it, Jay Crowder and Mikal Bridges are already playing 36 minutes a game, roughly. Mm-hmm. So to lose Torrey Craig's 15 minutes, you only have a few ways to fill that. Either Cam Johnson starts logging a lot more time, and he has to log more of that time at the 4, where he's played at the 4 before, plenty, but he's also played a lot of 3. Or your other options are introduce a guy like Abdel Nader or Jalen Smith into the rotation, and they very well may be interested in doing that as well. I have a feeling we'll touch on that later. But there's definitely opportunity for Cam to log more minutes. And for him, it's just about being stronger. He's shown an impressive ability, I think, to be switchable and keep the Suns' defensive scheme consistent. Switch out onto guys at positions 1 through 4 onto the perimeter in isolation situations, which is really good to see. Maybe now it's about getting a little bit stronger, doing kind of some of the other things that Jay Crowder can do from a help defense perspective, from a screen navigation perspective on defense, and really giving more faith in Monty that he can play the 4 more consistently. One thing Mike and I have gone back and forth on is there a point this season at which Cam Johnson earns the starting power forward spot outright? And I think both of us have said we're torn on it, but both of us have said, at least at this point, it's probably unlikely, but it's certainly possible. There is that possibility. So yeah, I think for Cam, it's just, he's supposedly stronger, and we'll see to what extent that can actually raise his ceiling as an overall team player.
Yeah.
And
I agree with all of that. Sorry. No, I was just going to mention that the numbers with Cameron Johnson with the starters are really good, and they're actually better than the numbers with Jay Crowder in the starters, but the difference is like a 400-minute difference in the amount of minutes played with Jay Crowder in the starters compared to Cameron Johnson. So I don't know how much you can read into that. But yeah, I think his ability to defend the guys that Jay Crowder defends, I don't know, he'll never get to what Jay Crowder is doing. So it's just about making up the difference in other ways, whether that be on the ball or like, as much as we talk about him as a shooter, he's not Duncan Robinson. Well, maybe he's Duncan Robinson last year, but he's not Duncan Robinson the year before. If he can get up to like 45% on his 3-point shots or something insane like that on a high number of attempts, then obviously I think that would make a big difference for him as well.
Yeah, and I know, look, still shooting has to be his calling card. I don't know if I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm definitely surprised with the confidence that he has had in sort of like the pull-up mid-range, even though it's not a huge part of his game and it wasn't super efficient. He took more of those just throughout his career so far than I ever would have expected. His defense has been the most pleasantly surprising aspect of his career to me. And you guys already mentioned you don't know whether he can handle like the same individual assignments as Jay Crowder, but as someone who works within the team dynamic, you can count on him to be in the right spots, make the right decisions, not make these stupid fouls a ton of the time. There's super value in that. And I guess if he's going to get stronger and like not sacrifice really any speed or decision making, maybe it's not as, I would immediately just say, just keep Crowder in the starting lineup because it feels like he's a better individual defender. And while starting doesn't matter, like you do inherently tend to play more minutes if you're in the starting lineup. But when you sort of view it through that lens that you guys are describing, it's actually not that, it wouldn't be absurd to begin with, but it definitely seems there's a stronger argument, I guess, to starting Cam Johnson down the line.
Mm-hmm. I mean, technically Jay Crowder was a better 3-point shooter than Cameron Johnson last year. How weird is that?
He did at least go off in the playoffs. Did he shoot like 44.6% from three in the playoffs, I think?
That's a good point.
He was incredible. There were moments in the playoffs where Cameron Johnson was keeping the offense alive. And, like I talked about the long-lasting effect of the playoffs on the fans' minds, I think that's the main reason that a lot of people are really high on him, and rightfully so.
Mike, did anyone get to the bottom of the Deandre Ayton comments where, was it a joke, but where he just said, like, I've mastered the role that I don't like, essentially? Like, what the hell was that?
No, it's not a joke. I'll tell you that from right away. It's definitely not a joke. And it's not, uncommon to hear from big men as well. I think, Anthony Davis has said it. There have been times that, even Dwight Howard has said something like that. I think that Deandre Ayton believes that there's more to his game than what he was doing last year. Mm-hmm. And it's up to him to prove it at this point. And I like, the fact that he's saying it out loud and to the press, like technically he's saying it to the press, right? I think is something that he is putting pressure on himself to now prove it. Now, whether or not I believe that there's more to it, I think it's a possibility. But the one part I think that worries me about it, because I'm sort of conflicted, because I want him to develop more of a diverse offensive game in particular. But the one part that worries me about it is that he's really, 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 really good at the big man stuff. Mm-hmm. So I still want him to be able to embrace the stuff that he's really good at while also expanding his game. And I think that's the challenge for him. But look, he said it before. Actually, it's funny. In his Players Tribune article that he wrote, he talked about how he doesn't even like to be referred to as a big or big man or big fella or anything like that. He wants to be less limited in his roles. And he even mentioned that in practice, when they're separating guys into like bigs, wings, and guards, Mikal Bridges and Javon Carter would go up to him and say, "Hey, where do you want to go? Do you want to? I'm not sure where to put you. You don't want to be a big, right?" So I think it's something that he's talked about before. And I do think that the way that he said it in this particular interview was, it essentially comes down to, I did what you asked me to do last year. Yeah, there's like in brackets, he didn't say it out loud, pay me. Like that's there in brackets. Like he didn't say
big
it. Big
bracket, big all caps bracket right there. Yes.
Yeah. And then I think the also the other subtext of that is, let me do more. I believe I can do more. And we'll see if he can.
And you actually alluded to this, is there is a tendency to think if it's, I don't want to say a traditional big man, but let's say a non-star or non-like offensive superstar big man, there is this theory that you can approximate 75% of what they do for a lot cheaper than maybe someone like Deandre Ayton's asking for. I don't feel that way in this case because of the strides he has just made defensively over the past 2 years, and just looking at how good he was for them at points in the playoffs and the guys that he was going up against and just holding his own. I see like the pathway to him being great on that side of the floor. I'm just curious as to what you guys think is the pathway. And I'll throw this to you, Sam, is it him just doing more of the same stuff on offense to being a lot better? Or is there actually room on this team for him to probably indulge some of the stylistic leanings that he's just inferring about when he says things like, I can do more. I don't necessarily want to play the big man role.
Yeah, well, again, it's all in his own mind. I think if he's just going to keep playing the same way that he does, then there is an offensive ceiling there that's very obvious. It's, he can only do so much. And as Mike was saying, the level that DeAndre's already at of being like a 65, 66% true shooting guy, it's tough thinking about his development, both in the way that makes the most sense for DeAndre Ayton to be the best player possible, but also makes sense for the Suns to be the best team possible that can really compete for a championship this year. Because it's like, you're not going to get better success out of the offense by running more Ayton post-ups. You're just not. He could score decently well on them, but, maybe he could get to 20 points per game, but the offense isn't going to be better. Similarly, DeAndre could improve as a shooter, but why would you want him, shooting 31, 32% from deep on a few attempts per game when you can just have him at the rim and get a few alley-oops instead, right? So better for Ayton's development if he were to become a shooter, and we kind of still certainly hope he can, not better for the Suns. I think the one thing that kind of scratches the itch on offensive, this is both critical for DeAndre to prove that he's a max contract value offensively and would make the Suns a heck of a lot better because it makes him more versatile, is his attacking and playmaking out of the short roll. Because like 10 times a game, DeAndre will be situated at that elbow spot, and you can tell he's not really comfortable in his handles to put the ball on the floor and attack. So he needs to wait for a guard, be it Chris Paul, Devin Booker, whoever, to come around, accept the handoff, reset the offense, and do it again. If he can get used to just catching the ball in stride, putting the ball on the floor, one dribble, strong to the basket, or find an open passing lane to a corner shooter or cutter, that unlocks a hell of a lot in DeAndre's game. It could make his individual stats better. It makes him more, appealing maybe if he's thinking about his own contract, but it also makes the Suns a much more dynamic offense if he can unlock that too.
I just want to hit on something else that you said there, that just to really highlight this. There's this conversation about how DeAndre Ayton is used, that some people think that, especially fans of him in college, that he's being used incorrectly on the Suns. And to some small extent, I think you could make the case that if he was like on a bad team, he would be used differently because you would be experimenting more. But there are ways for him to take advantage of what the Suns did last season offensively, and do different things without the Suns changing their playbook at all. Now, Sam, you mentioned the short roll. That happens a lot. The Suns get trapped, Devin Booker gets trapped a lot more than Chris Paul, but Devin Booker gets trapped a lot. That leaves DeAndre Ayton sort of in no man's land. He has the ability to do different things there if he's confident enough to do them. There's also the DHOs. When he's doing those DHOs, now he can turn and dribble towards the basket if he wants every single time. Or when he catches the ball in that mid-range area, and this is the one case I think you could make that it's a Monty Williams thing, he could just turn and shoot. They would prefer him to take 2 dribbles towards the basket and embrace that contact at the basket. But if he's good enough to shoot, I think they would allow him to shoot there. So some part of this is a Monty Williams conversation, but I think that we should also acknowledge that part of it is a DeAndre Ayton conversation as well, because it's up to him to take advantage of those opportunities.
I didn't include this in the outline, but do you have and I'll throw it to you first, Mike, an official prediction of what you think, or even collectively between you two, what's going to happen for the extensions with Mikal and DeAndre? Do you expect one of them to sign them and one to not, both of them to sign one, neither of them to sign one? Where are you guys sort of at on that?
I'm terrified of just one of them signing. And that's, to be honest, just either way, whether that be Mikal Bridges or DeAndre Ayton. I do find it interesting that we have just heard about the DeAndre Ayton extension. That's to me, that's very much proof that it's entirely agent based, and it's just an agent trying to gain leverage on the Suns. And I guess to some extent, it makes me feel better that we haven't heard anything about Mikal Bridges, because maybe they have a deal done. They're just trying to get them both done at the same time so they can announce them together. But I think that if I were to lean one direction, I would lean towards, I think they both get signed. I think we get Mikal for something like $490 or $495 or something like that. And then DeAndre Ayton signs a max, similar to Michael Porter Jr.'s is what I would guess.
If it's $4 for $90 for Mikal and that deal wasn't already signed, how the Suns not pushed to get that done already?
That's a steal. Well, I think Mikal's camp understandably knows that if there is that opportunity, maybe they didn't know coming out of the finals exactly what it was going to look like for Mikal. They had a whole offseason ahead of them for the Suns to see if they were going to try and acquire any more talent. Now that they know Mikal's being hyped up as the third option, why would you accept $490 when you're thinking a 16, 17, 18 point per game campaign from the guy? You'll be able to get for $110 if you wait. So it's a risk, as is anything with these negotiations, but they have leverage for sure.
For the record, Mikal Bridges has not missed a game since middle school.
Yeah.
Since what?
Since middle.
No, this is true. He has not missed a game since middle school. He was sick once in like
he was
a middle
sick
school
once,
tournament.
and he wanted to play, and his parents made him stay home, and then he was mad he missed the game. That was the only game he's missed. Basically, since he was a child.
That seems like something that I should have heard of already.
Yeah, it's a thing. They even one time they were resting the starters and they checked him in for just like 3 minutes and checked him out because he didn't want to miss his streak.
That is incredible. Like I said, look, if I'm Mikal Bridges and I get why you wouldn't do this, I'm 100% not signing anything other than a max extension. I clearly have maybe too much faith in Mikal Bridges at that point. Then I think there's a sign of how much progress the Suns have made is that we organically had this podcast conversation for X amount of minutes, 30 something minutes, and Devin Booker hasn't really come up.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point.
How times have changed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily like having this discussion, but because I just have agendas left and right, apparently, it irked me at how many people just assumed that Chris Paul was Phoenix's most valuable player last year. And I know that we've actually had this discussion in the past. I know you guys have talked about it on the Timeline podcast in the past. I'm asking you to scold the national media once more, is what makes, not even long term, because that's obvious, but what makes Booker like immediately the most valuable player to this team?
I just think he draws so much attention, and that's like the most important thing. That's one of those things that you might not see on the stat sheets. He's also one of the only players, we talked about it, that actually puts rim pressure, like actual pressure on the rim on this entire team. Chris Paul's not doing that anymore, and you need him to do that kind of thing. But the conversation about Devin Booker has always been a disaster on the internet. It's become such a disaster, and now even more like post finals, like I'm sort of understanding the way that other fans of other teams have felt after they lose the finals. If you look at sort of anything from ESPN or Bleacher Report that talks about the Suns, you look at the comments of that, now it's like attacking.
You really went there.
I mean, it's true, because the point is it's more of an audience than just the Suns fans that you and I interact with, Sam. And you see how they talk about and the blame that somebody like Devin Booker gets. And I just think he's always been underrated, and it's bizarre that you would think that it would have ended now, right? You would think that now they made the finals. Look, he had back-to-back 40-plus point games in the NBA Finals. He had a 40-plus point triple-double without Chris Paul in the Western Conference Finals. He had 8 threes against the reigning champions, Los Angeles Lakers, on their floor in order to eliminate them. 8 of 10, over 40 points against that team. You'd think that people would now...
Broken nose, too. That was not talked about enough.
Yeah, he broke his nose. He had a hamstring injury in the NBA Finals. And look, people can have whatever opinions they want about him, but it's become bizarre how much people are willing to just dislike and discount the things that Devin Booker does. And to me, if they're the type of people that point at specific stats, it's a problem with those stats more than it's a problem with Devin Booker himself. You have to rely on what you see, and what you see is that he's the most important player on the team, clearly.
Watching the attention that he draws when he just attacks has become like it's incredible to watch, especially over the past 2 seasons. And last year specifically, he was double teamed on a larger share of his possessions than Chris Paul was. And on the possessions in which he was double teamed, the Suns averaged 1.2 points per those possessions. And that's like, I'm not a fan of making these comparisons, but that would be the 4th most efficient offense in the league. Right, and so like the level of decision making that he has in those situations in general, and then just the attention he draws, has really become incredible. And you guys went really in depth on that internal development episode about his game. I think the easiest thing to point to is, what if his 3-point shooting was a little bit higher, especially off the dribble? And I will say, he does have the jump shot form of someone that I just assume, if you didn't show me the percentages, I'd be like, that guy definitely shoots like 38, 40% from beyond the arc. I don't know if that's telltale of anything, but what would make Devin Booker an all-NBA shoo-in moving forward, Sam?
Man, it's a combination of, you mentioned the off-the-dribble shooting. I've mentioned the off-the-dribble shooting a million times. What a false friend that shooting form is, that any of us so-called shot doctors online actually think we can parse through those things, because I've been burned a million times. What would make Devin Booker an all NBA shoe-in? Obviously, if the Suns retains their ability as like a 55-60 win team. And I think it's a combination of two things. One, the off the dribble shooting. Two, being a little bit less predictable. We all know Devin Booker is a great mid-range shooter, but being a little bit less predictable where sometimes he gets in trouble, not with his passing vision. His passing vision is quite good and his playmaking talent is amazing, but getting into trouble when he gets into that mid-range area when maybe he could just put a little bit more traditional rim pressure on the rim, push through the wall, so to speak, and try to get more attempts. Because that's kind of where the loose handle comes into play. Maybe he picks up some stupid turnovers that he shouldn't get by virtue of kind of being predictable in that area of the court. So I think a little more rim pressure plus a little better off the dribble shooting is maybe a 30-point per game campaign for Devin Booker. And if he gets there, yeah, he's an all-NBA shoo-in, as long as the Suns are good.
Can you just make the case for also more touches? Because I know you know the stats, and I'll just I guess break it down from my perspective. What could make him an all NBA guard is more touches, and just that. I think.
So I think the thing I think the thing is yes, more touches, but you have to present a better argument for where those touches are coming from. Are they coming from Chris Paul? Because Chris Paul ran a really good offense last year. I don't know if you noticed. Like, I don't want the conversation to become, yes, Devin Booker's amazing, and this is why we're disrespecting Chris Paul and what he did for the Suns. You know?
No, I don't think that the conversation has to come from that. But if you just make the comparison from the fact that, like, Donovan Mitchell had almost 50% more touches than Devin Booker did last year.
True.
Just on a per touch basis, that stat alone is remarkable if you just look at it from that perspective alone.
For Dan's listeners who don't know, Devin Booker has led the NBA in the most points scored per touch 2 seasons in a row, higher than guys like Kevin Durant, higher than guys like LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, you name it. Most efficient player in the NBA on a per touch basis, 2 years running.
And if you just increase those touches, this is the whole conversation about when players sacrifice for good teams. If you just increase those touches, I think more attention would come his way. It doesn't necessarily automatically make the team better because the best offenses are offenses that understand how to move the ball and have the most good players capable of finishing at the end of those plays. So it's not an automatic thing as far as making the team better. But I think if he just did more in this offense, if they relied on him more, that would bring more attention his way. I just don't know that it would be great for the Suns.
So my suggestion would be give me more Devin Booker as the de facto point guard lineups, which just don't happen. Last year, he was technically the point guard for under 20 possessions. And that feels like a way that could, like you said, maybe giving him like more looks than that could technically hurt the Suns offense. But I'm at the point where it's like if CP3 is going to be off the floor anyway, you're really kind of only infringing upon certain campaign minutes in those situations. So I would like to see more of that look. And I think that would help him gain. I don't necessarily think he definitely doesn't need to make any material changes to his game to be an all-NBA shoo-in. But if you're talking about getting him more touches, that sort of feels like a more organic way that you could up his volume.
Not to mention, the more that Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges especially are comfortable handling the ball, some of the issue we've seen with that in the past is this idea of playing, Rockets Harden ball to an extent of just, is Devin Booker really the level of playmaker where you want him handling everything and then giving him a bunch of wings who, yes, they're switchable, yes, they hit threes, but they're afraid to put the ball on the floor. It really doesn't feel like a very dynamic offense. If you put Devin Booker as the point guard, with Jay Crowder, Mikal Bridges, and Cam Johnson around him, 3 switchable as hell wings who hit threes, and 2 of the 3 of them are very comfortable putting the ball on the floor, you're doing it in a way now that you're not setting them up to fail. And maybe that wasn't always true in the past. So, I think you're right, Dan. I would like to see it.
The Suns also have Landry Shamet now. I mean,
it's true.
It's not this massive change as far as the offseason goes, but like that is another guy that's capable of playing off the ball with Devin Booker. But it also should be said that Cameron Payne shoots like 45% on catch and shoot threes. Like he's capable of playing off the ball with Devin Booker as well, and as a secondary playmaker, which did happen quite often in those lineups. But I do think that the Suns can experiment with Devin Booker as the quote unquote point guard without necessarily forcing him to play with just Cameron Johnson, Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, lineups like that. They can still have another playmaker on the court, whether that be Landry Shamet, who obviously not a point guard, but capable of doing some things with the ball, or even still with Cameron Payne, who is a great catch and shoot 3-point shooter, but also can still attack if the closeout is late. So, I agree with you, Dan, that I think he can do more there. And look at the assist numbers, just that alone. They went down dramatically last year playing with Chris Paul because he sacrificed. That's really where it came from.
I like that you guys like make segues for me. You mentioned Landry Shamet. If he's like rookie year Landry Shamet, like just the time he spent with the Sixers or a little bit with the Clippers, there's definitely more of an intriguing player there. But he's been passed around like a bong at this point around the NBA. What do you think about his fit? How do you think he's going to be used with this team? How much do you expect him to actually play? I'll throw that to Sam. I'm so bad. I need to get better at juggling multiple guests.
No, that's fine. Yeah, we just gotta work through it. I'll be honest. I think Landry's like a 10 to 15 minute per game guy from the get go, in my opinion. If I had to put a number on it, just because the amount that I think guys like Cam Payne and Cam Johnson primarily are going to play off the bench, plus Devin Booker and Chris Paul obviously soaking up a lot of minutes in the backcourt. But I'm very intrigued by the shooting, particularly the movement shooting, and I think there is potential for Landry even to play alongside Chris Paul and Devin Booker at the same time. That's something that Chris Paul has also advocated for coming out of training camp. So, yeah, we'll see. I mean, I have no reservations about who Landry is as a shooter. I have some level of reservations about the rest of the stuff that he does.
Yeah, defense especially, right?
Defense especially, yeah, that's really what it comes down to. I know he was a point guard in college, and that I know he can create for others. We haven't always seen it in the NBA, but it's not the attacking closeouts thing that I think is so much of an issue with Landry, although his finishing numbers aren't great, let's be honest. But yeah, it's definitely the defense thing is how much can you really leave him on the floor in playoff settings. In the regular season, I think he'll be fine.
The one thing I'll say is Monty Williams talks about Landry Shamet like the Suns traded for a 10-time All-Star. He loves Landry Shamet. So I'm not exactly sure how much Landry Shamet can bring, especially once the Suns get to the playoffs. But I have a feeling that he's going to be given a lot of opportunities, especially early, because Monty Williams is just in love with him as a player. And I think that will give him a pretty long leash to start out.
I think my question would be, is there anyone on this team that Monty Williams just doesn't love as a player and person? I feel like I want Monty Williams to be my life coach because of high he is on everyone.
He called JaVale McGee wacky yesterday, I think. I think he said he does some wacky things sometimes, but he's still a professional, which I thought was almost an insult when it comes to Monty Williams.
That's like, wow, that was really biting by Monty Williams. Look, Mike, you made a segue for me again. What do you like, or how do you feel about JaVale McGee, the crowning acquisition of the Phoenix Suns offseason?
Yeah.
What do you think about his fit with this team?
I want to just quickly say that I loved Dario Saric last year, especially in the first half of the season. And I think
lineup data is like, when you really dig into like the dates of how like it was this huge crescendo and then kind of just plummeted as the season got later.
It's one of It's one of the great unsolved mathematical mysteries of the 21st century, I think.
Well, it happened as soon as Sam and I made this bid for him to be in the Sixth Man of the Year conversation. That's when he cratered. But having said that, after that sort of crescendo that you talked about, Dan, because he was one of the best lineup guys in the NBA for the first half of the season, which is when, by the way, the starters were not clicking. So it was vital in order to keep the team afloat before they clicked in February. Having said that, the Suns had a problem when Deandre Ayton left the floor for this basically the second half of the season and the playoffs. And that problem was defending the rim and giving up too many offensive rebounds. And it was a massive problem. And it got worse and worse and worse as the season went along. And that's credit to Deandre Ayton, how good he is as a player, but it also pointed out a massive problem with the Suns lineups. Frank Kaminsky wasn't getting it done. Dario Saric, for as much as he brought in other ways, was not getting that done. So JaVale McGee solves what I think was one of the biggest problems in the Suns lineups last year. And I'm just very excited to watch him. And just also from I am ultimately a fan. And from a fan perspective, a center combination of Deandre Ayton, Frank Kaminsky, and JaVale McGee has to be one of the funniest combinations of centers in the NBA, because all three of those guys off the floor are incredibly goofy guys and really funny. And just from a fan perspective, I'm excited for the content that comes out of those three guys interacting off the court.
Yeah, JaVale's YouTube channel. He hasn't really posted anything Suns related, but I'm definitely tracking it.
What is going to happen? Are they going to ditch with Dario Saric out, especially rehabbing that ACL? Is like the sort of the small ball look gone for them at center?
Well,
or could you see them getting wacky at some point this season? They had the when you dig into the data, it wasn't great. I was very appreciative and I would see them running out, but like having Torrey Craig and Cam Johnson in your front court at one point.
I was very appreciative. I was going to ask you, Dan. It depends on, do you define Jalen Smith as a 4 or a 5? Because if he's a 4, then do we count that as small ball?
Well, first I have to ask you the question of, are you as high on Jalen Smith as you were last year when you sent me a tweet of him putting a video of him putting the ball on the floor, like spinning? It was probably preseason or summer league or it couldn't have been summer league, like into a layup. And I think you captioned like, can Deandre Ayton do this? It was just after we recorded a podcast. So do you remain as high on Jalen Smith as you were in that moment?
Don't trap me like that, man. Come on. That's not fair.
Do we expect Jalen Smith to play an actual role with the team? He had some really intriguing moments in summer league. No, okay. Fair enough.
Well, I'm going to say no.
Like I said earlier, the Torrey Craig minutes are open, but that requires Jalen to be a 4. And I don't see it personally. I see him as a 5 based on what we've seen so far. And yeah, Ayton and JaVale, they've got those minutes locked up. And even if there's an injury to one of them, Frank's going to absorb those minutes too. So he's pretty far down in the depth chart.
We're approximately an hour into a podcast that is not meant for entirely Suns fans. So I'm just going to say it here. Jalen Smith was really bad last season. Every time he was on the court, he looked lost. The Suns forced him into a role that he was clearly not comfortable with. And right now, if I were to guess that he would have a major role on this team going forward, that would be predicting a massive, massive, massive improvement for him. So I don't know that I could do that.
So, Mike, it sounds like the answer to this question for you is pretty easy, but who has the bigger impact on the rotation this year between Jalen Smith, Landry Shamet, and Abdel Nader? Which, by the way, that was like that's why it was hard to hate the Suns offseason, because what they did with their own guys, if you loved basically like that, I thought Nader was more valuable than they actually got him for. And he missed 2 months last year and then just came back, was defending his ass off like he didn't
in the finals. Yeah. I think that's interesting. I have a feeling Sam will say Nader, so I'm going to say Shamet because I think Shamet. I just think Shamet brings an element of like above the break shooting that the Suns kind of struggled with last year, because really the best guy at that was probably Chris Paul. And then maybe Cameron Johnson.
Cameron.
Cameron. That's a great point. Cameron Payne was probably the best at it. But as far as the way that Monty Williams described Landry Shamet was a shorter Cameron Johnson, which I think is a great way to describe him. And it just makes a lot of sense offensively for the Suns. And I think, we were talking about on our over-under podcast as far as what will Landry Shamet shoot. And I predicted probably less than 40% from 3, but only because I think he will be in a place for the Suns where he's going to be asked to take the most difficult threes of any player on the Suns. And the Suns needed a guy that was sort of this sort of off-ball movement, pressure release valve type shooter. And I think that's going to – I know that Chris Paul likes playing with guys like that, because he treated Devin Booker like that for the first month and a half of the season, and Devin Booker's not that. And I think he'll enjoy playing with somebody like Landry Shamet. So I'm going to say Shamet.
Really, I don't think Monty Williams would be wrong if he just started describing every shooter on this team in relation to James Jones, because that's kind of what the strategy has always been. Cam Johnson is tall James Jones. Landry Shamet is mini James Jones. Jalen Smith, in theory, is super big James Jones. It's kind of what all of them are.
Would your pick among that group be Nader, Sam?
Well, I think Shamet, actually, there may be a chance that he logs more minutes. And he's certainly the one who has gripped the most attention from people outside the Suns sphere. I don't really think anyone on the mainstream level still knows who Abdel Nader is. But when we made that joke earlier, I think it was Mike who said it, like Nader and Devin Booker being the only ones on this team to put real rim pressure on the defense. It's true. And I think Nader can honestly earn a solid 15 minutes per game of playing time just by doing what he does, which is he's got one gear, and that's just go. He gets the ball, he attacks closeouts, he's reckless. It's not always pretty, but it is relatively effective. So at the end of the day, if that's what you need to do to get to the free throw line and just get to the rim, he'll earn some time for sure.
I think it's low-hanging fruit, and this question's always matchup dependent, and I feel like there are only 2 potential answers here. But Sam, what do you think should be Phoenix's go-to crunch time lineup this season?
Crunch time lineup. I really feel like your only choices are the traditional starting lineup or the traditional starting lineup, but with Cam Johnson instead of Jay Crowder.
Yeah, this is such a boring question for the Suns.
I think for the Suns, those are the only ones. And
Yeah, I don't know what. I mean, unless you want, look, I would be this would be my next question. I'll throw to Mike. Is like, if they're a quirky, weirdo, unconventional lineup, you would want to see them
There
try.
are a lot of those. There are a lot of those.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I think that you made me think about this. How many teams brought back their entire starting lineup? The Suns are one of the teams that brought back their entire starting lineup. So I wonder how common.
Sam, I think that's your cue to tweet out continuity with a single letter in each tweet.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Maybe the Jazz?
That's my brand.
Yeah, probably the Jazz. Anyway, I think that I've been begging, and look, I'm not going to get too quirky with this because I've been begging to see more 3-guard lineups for the Suns, and I personally would like to see Cameron Payne, Chris Paul, and Devin Booker play more together. Now, I think Chris Paul immediately asked for Shamet and Booker to play together. I think he just envisions it opening up cutting lanes for Devin Booker, or Devin Booker opening up 3-point shots for Landry Shamet on the sacrificial cuts. But I still think Cameron Payne, Devin Booker, and Chris Paul need to play more together early on in this season. They didn't do it basically at all in the playoffs. I wanted to see it against specifically the Clippers. They didn't really go to it ever. So that's the main thing that I would like to see now. The other 2 positions in that you can play around with, but I think you need a big man to eat up the rebounds in that scenario. But that's what I'd like to see, more 3-guard lineups.
I've been writing to Monty, and he still hasn't heard me out, but we'll see if he does. Regarding my Elfrid Payton, Jalen Smith, Frank Kaminsky, JaVale McGee, Deandre Ayton lineup, we'll see. Might be.
How about 5 Elfrid Paytons? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's spend like 15 to 20 minutes on just the impact of Elfrid Payton on the Suns' rotation. Do you guys have any idea how many possessions that 3-guard lineup Mike referenced played last season during the regular season?
Oh,
I don't know.
I'm going to give you 75 possessions over on.
Oh, do you know the number?
Yeah.
Okay,
under, I'm guessing.
Over.
It's under.
Fuck.
They played 36 possessions together.
I thought it was going to be like slightly over.
I was going to guess like 20. What are the numbers like? Do you have that in front of you? I bet they're good.
127.8 offensive rating.
Holy shit.
Which is really good. 115.2 defensive rating.
Yeah,
which is bad.
Right.
Which is bad. But if you've got the best offense of all time,
net rating. It doesn't like you're outscoring the other team. That's all that matters.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's the best offense of all time. Exactly.
So my lineup and this is my favorite question to ask because I actually spend time thinking about this shit because I have nothing better to do apparently. And I don't think Monty would ever roll it out. But if you could give me, I'll call it the all wing lineup, even though that's not really what it is. But just Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, Devin Booker, Cam Johnson, and Abdel Nader. I just want to see what happens with that lineup on the floor. And they did try. Like I said, they had Cam Johnson and Torrey Craig as like their 4-5 at one point last year. Like, just give me like 35 possessions to see that group. It doesn't have to be at once. I just want to see it sprinkled in every now and again.
You are a man of culture, a man of positionless basketball for sure.
Well, yeah, I think the Suns struggled a lot with teams that played small ball. I think that was the biggest threat to the Suns in the Western Conference playoffs was the small ball lineups by the Clippers. DeAndre Ayton played his ass off, but I'd like to see them sort of experiment with ways to counter that with their own small ball group, though. Yeah, I agree with that.
The answer to this question, and I'll throw this one to Sam because I'm remembering to throw it to someone this time. It can change as the season goes on, obviously, but who do you view right now as the player most likely to be traded from the deadline? And is there, if it's not a specific player, is there like another need on this roster that you'd still ideally like to see them try and address via the trade market?
Man, I feel like Mike just tanked Jalen Smith's trade value out in front of everyone like 10 minutes ago. So now I can't answer Jalen Smith. It would be nice, like the idea behind the Thaddeus Young trade, which is what everyone was talking about with the Suns maybe for the past 3 or 4 weeks or so, at least in theory, was Dario Saric for salary matching purposes, plus Jalen Smith as an asset, plus other assets, picks, or whatever they want. I don't actually have any reason to believe that the Spurs are interested in that, but that's kind of the package that Suns fans were building. I would bet a lot of things could happen. But ultimately, if you pressed me to it right now, I would say I think the Suns are only looking at minor tweaks. And so that means minor tweaks in terms of more playmaking, initiation, more rim pressure, kind of something. If Shamet doesn't turn out to be enough, maybe you look at, is there another backcourt option that you could kind of pivot to give you some of that? Defense rebounding, I think they're set. I think they really set themselves up nicely with JaVale. So I can't think of anything else. I mean, Thad Young would have been nice because he would have kind of given you that versatility of he just does a little bit of everything. He gives you a small ball outlet to kind of replace what Saric did. And he's a terrific high post playmaker as well. So he really plays the Saric role, except much better. But I don't really see any other options like him out on the market. So I think we're looking at minor tweaks.
Yeah, I would like the Suns to get someone like Torrey Craig completely for free again, because that was pretty great. I mean, they just gave up cash for Torrey Craig. I mean, that was a remarkable thing that nobody saw coming. And, it's hard to really pinpoint someone right now other than Thaddeus Young. And even Thaddeus Young, like, it'd be tough to find minutes for him with the way that the Suns are returning so many players. But yeah, another wing, I think, is the most obvious thing that the Suns could target. So it's hard for me to pinpoint someone exactly like that.
I had two names circled that actually ended up being wings I would like to see them try and get. And Thaddeus Young was sort of just implicit here. If you can get him, I think you can look at it as, do you really give up Jalen Smith for a 33-year-old Thaddeus Young who's hitting free agency? I'm assuming you guys would do it based off the thoughts.
I think you absolutely do it when you look at the state of the Western Conference, if I'm being honest. Like with it being as wide open as it is, I think you would only make that type of move if you really feel that you're acquiring a top 7 rotation player. But Thad Young is that. Only someone who's going to be a real difference maker in the playoffs, not another Shamet type who will be a 9th man who maybe he plays in the playoffs, maybe he doesn't. But for Thad Young, that's a talent level where I think you absolutely do it.
And would it be, I think, Mike, you mentioned that you're not sure where, like, if it would be hard to carve out minutes for Thad Young, you wouldn't just default to him taking backup center minutes. Like, you really want to see JaVale McGee still have that role?
Well, yeah, I think that Chris Paul specifically asked for JaVale McGee. Like, it's clear that Chris Paul wants to play with JaVale. He likes to have those lob threats, the guys that are running down the lane. And I think, it's tough with Thaddeus Young because, right, he doesn't really shoot threes anymore, but he's sort of that, he's Dario Saric, essentially. He does what Dario Saric did for the Suns last year. He's this guy that sort of stands in the right playmaking places of the floor and is capable of moving the ball in the right ways.
Space eater.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with Thaddeus Young, it's not tough in that having the right tools and having more tools in the toolbox from Monty Williams is the main goal there. So it's just you start factoring in these guys all getting minutes. They run out pretty fast. They really start running out pretty fast.
The two names that I had circled, and they're small plays because I think I didn't compare it to the Torrey Craig move in my head when I was going through this, but that was a great way to sort of look at it as be opportunistic and, look for just those, players that arise that could maybe play a bit role, or maybe their role is a little bit larger than expected. Kenrich Williams in Oklahoma City had a quietly amazing season last year. I don't know because he's so cheap the season after this coming one, if that makes him less likely to be traded, but OKC just feels like it's always constantly shifting pieces. And I think there's a chance that we could even see Kenrich Williams play some 5 there this year based off how he was used last season.
I think
the other one I have is if they get into a roster crunch, and because they have dudes who are between 6'7" and 6'9" to spare, I think they're trying to set the NBA record for most players of that size of their contract. Yuta Watanabe in Toronto. I'm curious what his future is there, if they're going to keep Siakam, if they're going to keep OG and Scotty Barnes, if they actually like Kem Birch and Precious Achiuwa. That's, again, it speaks to, I think, how complete the Suns are, that those are the names that, like, I kind of thought of. And I said this before, and he eventually got traded. I really wanted them to figure out a way to get involved in the Larry Nance Jr. sweepstakes. I thought he would have been a fantastic get for them.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I mean, they just didn't have the assets, I think, for that one.
No, I don't think they did. So, Mike, the Suns' current win total over-under as we record this is 50.5. Are you taking the over or the under on that?
It's such an easy over for me. Like, it's just so easy to hit that over. So much so that when I was giving out our fake over-unders on our podcast, I set it at 55 because I wanted to see what our guys would pick at 55. But yeah, I would have. I'm going to bet on it. I'll say that. I'm going to put money on it.
They played at a 58-win pace last year. The Western Conference is not more intimidating this year because too many people are still hurt in the regular season. You could talk about the playoffs as a different beast if you want, but
and
just
they weren't
regular
really
season
that
record.
Good at the beginning of the season last year. They got much better as the season progressed.
Their competition didn't really get much better in my eyes. So the only way they're going to go down by more than 8 wins in a single season is a catastrophic injury to either Chris Paul, Deandre Ayton, or Devin Booker. Obviously, that's possible, but that could happen to anyone in any given season. So for me, it's an easy over.
I'm going to use my risk-free win bet app bet on that specific win total.
Separate conferences, obviously, but Philadelphia is 51.5. That seems blasphemous to me to have the Suns lower than Philly, knowing the Ben Simmons stuff. And like the East, the middle class of the East is really deep. Like it's not, I still think the meat and potatoes of the West is actually better than the East. I know a lot of people want to have the discussion of which is better. But I'm just that to me, it's an easy over for me.
Yeah.
So the Suns are my pick as of right now to come out of the West again. Ooh. That is subject to change when I finally go through my picks. And it's maybe that's why I'm so angry they weren't more aggressive with the offseason, because I wanted that to be easier. But
you really have to be one of the only ones I know, though, with that pick.
Look, I was so close to doing like the most obnoxious victory lap last year because they were my title pick. And it was just like so close so far to see them lose. Watching them lose 4 straight gutted me. Probably not as much as it gutted you two. But what teams do you look at in the West, Sam, and view as like they're the toughest for them to match up with, whether it's we need to just be better than them overall, getting past them in a playoff series, like however you want to interpret that?
Yeah, all of them are tough in their own ways. I would look at Denver again as a team where a Denver with a healthy Jamal Murray, we swept them. And I trust me, I give Nuggets fans, I shouldn't say we. The Suns swept the Nuggets because people get mad when you start doing that. And I give Nuggets fans all sorts of shit on Twitter about it because I think they got a little cocky and they deserve it. However, I am not naive, and I'm willing to admit that would be a much different series with an additional year of development for Michael Porter Jr., who I do have questions about in a playoff setting, but still. And most importantly, with Jamal Murray being healthy. I think that's a really interesting matchup. The Jazz remain an intriguing matchup. I think Deandre Ayton has evolved to a point where that specific matchup maybe used to give me more pause 6 months ago than it does now. There are a few teams that really frighten me. This is the point. I could look at the Lakers. I could look at the Nuggets. I could look at the Jazz. If the Clippers got fully healthy as well, obviously. Maybe even the Warriors. I look at a lot of teams and I'm like, yeah, they could beat the Suns in a series, but none of them do I think we're actually, again, them. None of them do I think the Suns are actually underdogs. Really good position to be in.
I think if the Clippers were fully healthy, that's the biggest threat.
They are underdogs.
I just think they're
fully healthy.
Yeah. I think the Suns are just, it's a really tough matchup for the Suns in particular. Chris Paul and Devin Booker, like they have the right kind of guys to really bother them, and their ability to switch so easily and still have guys that can defend one-on-one and even help and get back to guys on 3-point shooters. Like that's tough for the Suns. And beyond that, I think the Lakers too. I think the fact that Anthony Davis is most likely going to be playing center a lot, I actually weirdly think that matches up better for the Suns, with the fact that Russell Westbrook is on the team now too. But maybe not. I think that team could be really tough too. But yeah, I would like a really healthy Warriors team is tough for everyone to match up against because they have Steph Curry.
I would simply like to see the Lakers shoot above 35% from deep as a team in any regular season game against the Suns this year before I really take the step of being afraid of them in a playoff setting.
I don't know what to make of the Lakers. They'll be fine, but the Russell Westbrook thing is just like one of the worst jump shooters in NBA history. So I think I'd be with you guys if the Nuggets are going to be fully healthy. I'm still curious as to, I know torn ACLs aren't the end of the world, but how many games does Jamal Murray get under his belt? What does he look like by the time the playoffs roll around? I'm almost just inclined to go with Utah because I feel like the Suns, the way they want to play, isn't going to disrupt Utah's defensive scheme as much as some of the other teams can, unless the Suns want to deviate from what they're doing, which why would you do that when it's clearly working?
Chris Paul has beaten Gobert in the playoffs multiple times, and he just doesn't like. I feel like he loves playing against Gobert, and that's the one thing that I just think with the Nuggets. Sorry to go back to it, but what does Jokic do on defense against the Suns? I just like it's just such a bad matchup for him, and you saw it over and over and over again that he was just, if they drop, they hit the mid-range shot on him over and over and over again. If he plays at the level, they just get right past him, and then they're finding corner shooters over and over again.
It would just really help if they had the weak side pressure coming to help in the form of anyone who's not Michael Porter Jr. And so maybe Jeff Green will help with that a little bit. But you're right, that it's a problem. It was an obvious problem in the series, and it's not a problem.
I just don't know how it's solved.
It's not a problem that's going to go away just because Jamal Murray is healthy, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there anything or anyone about this team I didn't ask that you guys think needs to be covered? I feel like we didn't talk too much about Campaign, who had like the resurgence, but just anything specifically that you still think needs to be talked about with this team?
I think we covered about all of it, right?
Yeah, I think we got it. I think your listeners are probably all sunsed out at this point. Maybe they learned a thing or two, though.
Yeah.
Then they're going to continue to get suns out as my agenda moves forward if I pick them to win the title again.
With each Mikal Bridges off the dribble jumper, the agenda grows every single one.
I did tweet something about that, just looking at his like the progression of how many off the dribble jumpers he was taking, and people on Twitter were, I think probably because one of you retweeted it. There were people who were very excited and people who were like mad about that. But the Mikal Bridges agenda continues around these parts. I'll start with Mike. Are you able to tell our listeners where they can find you on social media and where they can obviously find all the great work that the Timeline is doing?
Yeah. I'm at Protected Pick. You can find me on Twitter tweeting mostly about the Suns, a little bit about music, but you can find our podcast on any podcast app. It's called The Timeline, a Phoenix Suns podcast, at The Timeline Pod on Twitter. We also also on YouTube. You can find us on YouTube. We did just recently launch a Patreon. If you're interested, we do extra episodes there, extra content, some writing. Patreon.com/The Timeline. You can check us out there. And since I have a chance to plug, I'm just going to say go Mercury. I'm excited to watch them in the finals.
Sam, where can our listeners find you on social media?
Good call on the Mercury, by the way. At S Cooper Hoops or Scooper Hoops, that works as well, is my Twitter profile. And all the same places as Mike. We run the pod together. YouTube channel's great. Always looking for, if you're looking for kind of bite-sized Suns analysis, maybe in the form of 5 or 10 minutes and not a full podcast, find us on the YouTube channel. If you're looking for full podcasts, we bring those every week. So any streaming app works for that.
I echo everything they said. I can't recommend their podcast enough, and you all should consider subscribing to their Patreon. Mike, Sam, thank you guys so much for coming on and doing this with me as per usual. It's great talking to you guys, and I think, as you know, at this point, I will be pestering you again down the line.
Thanks, Dan.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Dan.
What's going on, everyone? I'm Claudia Bellafato, and he is
Joe Fan.
This is Bet to Win. We talk betting. Break down the lines. We have the traders come on each week. We have some experts come on to talk boxing, UFC. We talk football. We talk basketball, baseball. What else do we talk about, Joe?
We make fun of each other.
We make fun of each other.
We have a whole lot of fun doing it.
We do.
So come join us. Pick some winners. Lament the losers. Have a good time doing it. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. New episodes out every Monday and Thursday.